Alright, we got another puzzle here. In this one we are asked, white is better, equal, or worse. Alright, so we asked for a basic evaluation, and we're asked what is white's best move. Alright, this looks like a very straightforward positional problem. I say very straightforward, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but this looks like a position where we need to calculate the possible exchanges occurring on D3 and F5 and on D6 and figure out, what's the strongest possible play considering these options. So we can capture on F5, we can capture on D6, we can capture on neither, and see what black does in response. Let's start with the most forcing continuation. So we'll go bishop takes F5, then we'll go pawn takes knight on D6 and see what we get. Bishop takes F5, knight takes F5 is forced. What is this position? I like white a little bit, not a lot bit. I'm not seeing any real tactics. White just has more space. I think that matters, but in terms of some kind of a win, I don't think there's any kind of a win. White's a little bit better. Maybe I'm being a little too negative when I say a little bit. White's space probably does mean something. So bishop takes F5, knight takes F5. Maybe it's a pretty clear advantage for white, but it's not a win. Next up, we have takes on D6 when black needs to take on D3. Obviously, black has to take on D3. Our rook on F1 is hanging now. So, yay, we love that. Rook over to D1. Feels like the most natural move. I'm starting to worry that we are losing the pawn on D6 by force. Let's see if black does like bishop E2, because black needs to deal with the threat to the bishop. We'll hop up rook E2, just for example. Alright, we'll say black takes on F3, pawn takes F3. White should be kind of happy about that exchange. Bishop takes F3, knight takes F3. That was unforced, but recapture keeps this knight out of the square. So we kind of like that. But after all of those exchanges, black should come after this pawn on D6 with a vengeance. Or a somethingance. And that pawn on D6 is a goner. So the question is, can we get something for it? Knight C5. Targeting pawn on B6. Pawn on B7, I'm sorry. But you know what? Black can just play rook B8. We're still going to take on D6 next turn. Maybe there's the move pawn E4 in these lines to try and fork. If black takes on D6, we could fork with pawn E5, but we don't have enough support for this, do we? You know what? Maybe we do. This is getting interesting. Okay, pawn takes D6, bishop takes D3, rook E1, bishop here. We go rook E1. I was not being picky about where I put that rook, but maybe we put that rook on E1. That bishop needs to move again. Pawn takes knight. Pawn takes knight. Now when black comes after our pawn on D6, we march forward, pawn E5. And whether or not black trades on E4 with the pawn or not, any captures on D6 that happen run into a pawn advance to E5. So we fork the knight and we fork the rook. That means that black can't win the pawn back on D6. And not only can black not win the pawn back on D6, when we get that pawn to E5, march up the board, boom, boom. We get a protected pawn on D6, and we get an outpost on C5 that we can't lose unless black makes this pawn a little weaker. This is starting to feel very promising. So although this pawn looks dead in the water, I don't think it is. And I think we get to keep a protected passed pawn. If that is correct, this is definitely the continuation of choice. Let's double check our line. Black has to take on d3, clearly forced. We attack that bishop. If the bishop just retreats, I think that we're doing pretty well, because black is missing a critical tempo in getting after that pawn. I think knight e5, knight c5, knight a5, these kinds of moves are tying black down sufficiently so that I don't think black can go and easily win the pawn. Black's bishop on the light squares is bad. It's outside the pawn chain, so it's not as bad as you might think, but it is not able to really fight with that pawn on d6. So I think that's good, maybe not great. I think we can hold on to the pawn by keeping black occupied. If we continue further, pawn takes d6, bishop takes, rook over, bishop here, rook over, bishop takes knight, pawn takes knight. If black does not try to go after the pawn on d6 immediately with the rook, and instead tries to go after it with a knight, which would avoid those kinds of forks, I think then we're seeing possibly d7 to keep the pawn. We're seeing ideas of knight b7, knight c5 defending b7. I'm feeling pretty good about this. Yes. I think taking on d6 is, I think it's strong. It's the kind of move in a blitz game I would play real quick. I say that even though I've spent a while thinking about this, but seeing a sketch of these kind of variations would make me play it in a blitz game. Against Komodo, I'd be a little worried, but I feel like this is the best bet. I'll mention, so I think that bishop takes, knight takes is a bit better for white. I like it, but it's no win. I think there's also the possibility of knight here, encouraging black to take, but I think that's still no win. It's just okay for white, and I think black can also even move this knight somewhere and allow trades like this, and the doubled pawns are not a real weakness for black at all. So something like knight e1 or rook d1 or whatever, I don't think is so great. So the question is, can you take on d6? I think that you can, and you get enough play for it, which is a pretty fun and instructive line, but I might be missing something, and I wonder if, even if that's the intended line of the authors, you know, there could still be things lurking that Komodo doesn't see. But let's take a look at the solution and see what they've got. White is winning 2 points. What? Oh my god. Even in a simple position, one can find a surprising turn. White's move would please David Bronstein, who specializes in such ideas. This is the game Hort Duckstein, Vesely, Morave, 1968. Bishop a6 was played. Desperado, this was not on my mind at all. It is an eye-opener for black. The position becomes hopeless. Bishop, or pawn takes a6 is not playable because after cd, black's pawns are wrecked. The d pawn is passed and hard to pick up. Ooh, that's pretty. Let's take a quick look at that with the computer, and let's also see what the computer thinks of the lines that I was giving. So bishop a6 is totally validated by the engine. Komodo's like, yeah, of course, dummy. Why didn't you see that? You have to take, because if you don't take, white is taking on b7. I say that and the computer says don't take here, but everything else is obviously bad. And then after taking here, you know, this pawn is safe and protected and passed. This is hit. This is in trouble. There's knight a5, there's knight c5. This is just ghastly. So totally missed that move. In my defense, if I can have a defense. CD, bishop takes d3, rook e1 is... I gave rook d1, trying to gain time on the bishop, which is not as good according to the engine. Bishop b5 looks awkward, but the computer thinks you can do it. But this is all playable stuff. Rook e1 is recommended by Komodo, and you're getting something. It's not so easy for black to pick up the pawn on d6. The moves we're seeing are moves like knight c5, which I mentioned. In fact, the computer's best lines are b6, which weakens the c6 pawn. I say weakens, you just get it right away if you want it. But it looks like you might be better off building up, because if you take right away, bishop b5 kicks the rook, and the d6 pawn will fall, and the position's symmetrical and likely drawn. So just a move like a4 or knight somewhere gives white a strong position here. After rook e1, knight e4 is recommended for black, but we're seeing that knight c5 idea, and we get that protected passed pawn, which is what I was touting. But this is not completely over. It is good for white, not completely over, as opposed to bishop a6, which is. The other possibilities which we can mention, bishop takes f5, definitely not a win. There's no way it could be a win. Knight takes f5 is just a normal position. White is better. This plus 0.2 that we're seeing, I feel like it might be better than that, because I do like white's chances to get something on the queen side, but probably accurate play gives black counterplay. And then something like this is really just too slow. You're asking for black to occupy e4, and then it's a real problem for you that you can't play f3 because g3 is loose. Alright, so bishop a6. Ooh, that's a hot move. I really like bishop a6. I'm disappointed not to see it in the game. It's a really instructive move because it's not so difficult, but how many of us would see it in a game, because there's other forcing continuations in it. The position looks almost quiet, which I even said right at the beginning. So that's just a clear mistake on my part, and it's a nice win. Compliments to Hort on getting to play it in the game, and and then writing his own puzzle book so we could include it. That's the best thing. If you play a good game, you got to make sure you write your own puzzle book later so you get to include your moves in the puzzle book.